Good morning, students. Hope all of you are doing good. So we will continue our class today and we will be looking into synoptic problem as I told you yesterday. Okay, so I hope you are following how our class is progressing. So we are already into the New Testament books and we have begun with the synoptic gospels. Okay, so we are looking into the first three gospels together. Yesterday, we looked into the authorship or origin, date and place of writing, and the emphasis of the Gospels, and also the outline I have given for you. All right, so that is a kind of historical background or situating each Gospel within its own history. Okay, so that is what we did yesterday. And yesterday also, I just mentioned about the issue called synoptic problem, that there are many similarities and also differences among the first three gospels. Okay, that's what we will be seeing in bit more detail today. Okay, you'll be getting introduced to a few theories regarding that. All right, so let's begin. I hope the screen is also visible for you. Synoptic problem. Okay, so here is an introduction. Let me read it for you. Please follow me. There are many similarities and also many differences among the three gospels called synoptic gospels. All right, so what kind of similarities and differences are there? There are verbal similarities, that so to say that there are similarities in the wordings of the gospels. Okay, so if you read the gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, okay, you might have noticed that there are many similarities in the very words that the evangelists use. Okay, we'll be looking into an example for that, but just I'm trying to trigger your thoughts. Okay, even before you came to a Bible college, just in your personal reading of the Bible itself, you might have noticed that there are many verbal similarities, word to word similarities among the first three gospels. And secondly, there are also similarities in order or sequence of events. Okay, if you see the first three gospels, generally the first three gospels have an account of John the Baptist, then it moves on to the baptism of Jesus, then comes the temptation of Jesus, and then Jesus's ministry begins. Okay, Jesus does ministry in the region called Galilee, and then later he moves on to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection take place, and finally Jesus meets his disciples after the resurrection again, and then he ascends into heaven. Okay, so this is a broad similarity in order or sequence that is found in the first three gospels, but there are also some closer similarities if you observe it very closely. Okay, so that is similarity in order or sequence, and then there are verbal dissimilarities. Okay, just like how there are verbal similarities, there are also verbal dissimilarities. Okay, we will look into an example which will help you to understand it better. And then there are dissimilarities in order or sequence of events. Okay, just like how there are similarities, there are also dissimilarities in the sequence of events. Okay, if you do a close reading, compare Mark, Matthew, and Luke side by side and see, you will notice that there are some dissimilarities in sequence as well. And then there are some additions. Okay, even yesterday I think I was pointing out, for example, you take Luke's gospel, you have the parable of the prodigal son, you have the parable of the lost sheep. Those are not found in Matthew or Mark. Okay, so there are some additions like that. And then there are some missing portions. Okay, for example, just see, make a comparison between Matthew and Luke. What is found in Luke is not found in Matthew. The same parables which I mentioned, parable of the prodigal son or parable of the lost sheep, which are there in Luke, are not there in Matthew. So there are some missing portions as well. When you compare the three gospels, you can find such kind of things, like additions are there in some gospels, and then there are some missing portions. Another one, if I should point out, I can point to the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5 to 7. Okay, compare Mark and Matthew. You have in the Gospel of Matthew Sermon on the Mount, but you don't have it in the Gospel of Mark. So that is a missing portion in Mark, or you can say that is an addition in Matthew. Okay, in this way, there are some kind of very intriguing factors. Okay, very interesting things going on in the first three gospels. All of them are narrating the life of Jesus, as we saw yesterday. But then there are all these different things working in these gospels, like similarities and differences, additions and missing portions. All right. So let's look into a couple of examples to understand. First of all, for similarities, let me just read Matthew 3, 7 to 10 for you, which is on the left. And then we will make a comparison with the same verses in Luke. Okay, let me read the Matthew verses for you. Offspring of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Bear fruit, therefore, worthy of repentance, and do not presume to say in yourselves, we have Abraham as father. For I say to you that God is able from these stones to raise up children to Abraham. Already the axe is laid at the root of the trees. For every tree not producing good fruit is cut down and cast into the fire. Okay, this is Matthew 3, 7 to 10, which are the words of John the Baptist. And when you jump to Luke chapter 3, 7 to 9 on the right, you see the same words for John the Baptist, okay, attributed to John the Baptist. Word by word, if you see, beginning from offspring of vipers, just you read it and see, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Bear fruit, therefore worthy of repentance, and so forth. It is word by word similar. Okay. And then there is one word that is different also. Okay. That I have highlighted for you in red color, where you can see. In Matthew, you have, do not presume to say in yourselves. Whereas in Luke, you have, do not begin to say in yourselves. Okay. Though there are many similarities, there are also differences like this in the first three gospels. Okay, this is exclusively an example for similarities, so you can see how much similar these two accounts are. Okay, word by word these are very similar, but then there is one word difference as well. Okay, this is an example for similarity. Let's look at an example for differences. Okay, compare Matthew's genealogy and Luke's genealogy. Okay, before this comparison, let me also add that Mark doesn't have a genealogy, right? Mark doesn't have a birth story or infancy narrative of Jesus, whereas Matthew and Luke have. But just try to compare them, Matthew's birth story of Jesus and Luke's birth story of Jesus. Just try to do a quick reading of that today. You will see that they are somewhat or very much different as well. Okay, when you read Matthew's birth story of Jesus, you see angels appearing to Joseph in dreams and guiding Joseph. Whereas when you see Luke's birth story, you don't see angels appearing to Joseph and leading him very much. Okay, but you see angel appearing to Mary. Okay, that is what we see predominantly in Luke's infancy narrative. Okay, in this way, you see some differences in the infancy narratives between Matthew and Luke, but surprisingly, you don't have any kind of such narrative, a birth story in Mark. Okay, these are the very interesting things in the synoptic gospels, the similarities and differences. Okay, let's just look into the differences that is given in this slide regarding genealogy. In Matthew's genealogy, beginning from Zerubbabel, you have then Abiud, and then Eliakim, and then Azor. Whereas you make a comparison with Luke, you have Zerubbabel, but the next three names are different: Reza, Johanan, Jodah. Okay, what does this mean? Does this mean that one gospel writer is saying something false? Okay, does that mean Matthew is not representing the truth, not telling the truth correctly, or does it mean Luke is not telling the truth correctly? No, it's not like that. Okay, if we do a kind of closer study, we understand that Matthew's emphasis is different, and therefore Matthew gives different names in his genealogy, whereas Luke's emphasis is different, and therefore he gives different names in his genealogy. Okay, both are true, both are not contradicting. Okay, this is what a close study of the Gospels in view of the synoptic problem helps us to discover. They are not contradicting, none of them is telling lies, both are representing the truth. That we will understand by a closer study of the Gospels, considering the synoptic problems. Okay, and another difference I have put in the bracket for you, there are 12 names from Zerubbabel to Jesus in Matthew, whereas there are 21 names from Zerubbabel to Jesus in Luke. Okay, so this is how we see similarities and differences among the first three Gospels. Okay, all this leads to the point that there is a problem, and that problem scholars have called it as synoptic problem. Okay, these similarities and differences has led to the study called synoptic problem. Okay, and Mark Goodacre, a scholar, defines synoptic problem as the study of the similarities and differences of the synoptic gospels in an attempt to explain their literary relationships. So to say, how one gospel writer and another gospel writer have these similarities and differences in their writing. Okay, just give me a minute. Some issue with my laptop. Let me check it. All right, let's continue. So many studies have been done in order to solve the problem. Some of the proposed theories will be discussed today. Begin with Augustinian theory. Okay, St. Augustine was an early church father, and he tried to solve this problem. He noticed that there is a kind of similarity and differences, a relationship among the first three gospels, and this is what he came up with. He said that Matthew was the first gospel written, and then Mark used Matthew in writing a shortened or abbreviated version of Matthew. And finally, Luke followed Mark and Matthew and wrote his gospel. Okay, are you following this? This is Augustinian theory. This is what St. Augustine proposed. He just went by the canonical order, the order that we find in the Bible. This is the order, right? Matthew, then Mark, then Luke. So he said that Matthew wrote the gospel first. Mark then used Matthew and wrote a shortened version of Matthew. And finally, Luke used Mark and Matthew. Then we have Griesbach theory. This was proposed by a scholar named Johann Jacob Griesbach, and he proposed that Matthew wrote his gospel first, and then Luke used Matthew and composed his gospel. Finally comes Mark. Mark used both Matthew and Luke in writing a summary of both Matthew and Luke. Okay, are you following this? Matthew wrote first, Luke then used Matthew and wrote his gospel. Finally, Mark used both Matthew and Luke and composed a summary of those two. This is Griesbach theory. And then we move on to two-source theory. And two-source theory has two facets to it, okay, which you need to be very clear about. That is called Markan priority and Q hypothesis. Okay, what is called Markan priority? It means that Mark was the first gospel written. Markan priority means Mark was the first written gospel. And according to this theory, both Matthew and Luke used Mark independently of each other. Okay, are you following this? Mark wrote his gospel first, and then comes Matthew and Luke, and Matthew used Mark separately. Luke also used Mark separately. The next point, to explain the passage common to Matthew and Luke but are not present in Mark. Okay, so see this problem here. They are saying that Mark wrote the gospel first, and then Matthew used Mark, and Luke also used Mark. Okay, but then when you see Matthew, there are some passages which are not there in Mark, right? And when you see Luke, there are some passages which are not there in Mark. For example, you see in the bracket, preaching of John the Baptist. Okay, you don't see the preaching of John the Baptist in the Gospel of Mark, but you have it in the Gospel of Matthew and also in the Gospel of Luke. Another example, temptation of Jesus. You see in the Gospel of Mark, the temptation of Jesus is not elaborately given. It is just given in one verse, right? Jesus was in the wilderness being tempted. Just a summary, one statement, that's all. But when you read Gospel of Matthew, you have three temptations of Jesus, right? How Jesus was tempted three times with the different temptations. And same thing you find in the Gospel of Luke. Okay, so if Mark wrote the Gospel first and Matthew Mark, there is a question. From where did Matthew get the material of the temptation of Jesus? Because Mark doesn't give it. And same way, where did Matthew get the material of the preaching of John the Baptist? Because Mark doesn't give it. The same with Luke. All right. And so to explain the passages common to Matthew and Luke, but are not present in Mark. The theory, that is the two source theory, assumes the presence of another document called Quelle, which is considered to be lost at present. Okay, this Quelle is a German word which means source. So this theory assumes that there was a source called Q source, which is not there today, okay, which is lost. But then this was a source which Matthew used and also Luke used. Matthew used and also Luke used. And this explains the common passages between Matthew and Luke. All right. So this is called the Q hypothesis. Okay, I hope you are following me. Okay, two facets are there when it comes to two source theory, Mark and priority. That is, Mark wrote his gospel first, and then you have Q hypothesis. That is, Matthew and Luke both used a common source called as Q, apart from the Markan source. Okay, which means Matthew and Luke both used two sources. Let me read it. Matthew and Luke both used two sources, and therefore we have the name two source theory. And what are those two sources? The two sources are Mark and Q. Okay, are you following me? Mark and Q. Right? Matthew and Luke copied this Q material also independently of each other. Yeah, I hope you followed me for this two source theory. Okay, and then I have given one more point. Okay, that is an extension of this two source theory, that some scholars also think that Matthew had a special source called M source and Luke had a special source called L source. All right, so that is an extension of it, and I mentioned some of the scholars who hold on to this theory. Okay, this is a very important theory as well. Okay, finally we have the Farrer. Okay, this theory was developed by Austin Farrer, opposed to the two source theory. Okay, this man Austin Farrer, he opposed this two source theory, not completely. He also held on to the Markan priority, but he opposed the second facet of it, that is the Q hypothesis. All right, he said that if Luke's use of Matthew is proven, then there is no need for the lost document called Q. Okay, so what was his theory? His theory was Mark was written first, and then Matthew used Mark, and finally comes Luke. Luke used both Mark and Matthew in his gospel. Okay, are you following this? He held on to that Markan priority. Mark wrote first, and then comes Matthew, who used Mark, but there is no Q here. Okay, and finally comes Luke. Luke used both Mark and Matthew, and there is no Q here in his theory. Okay, so this is called Farrer theory, and Michael Goulder is another proponent of this theory. Okay, are you following this, friends? So we looked into four theories. Okay, Augustinian theory, Griesbach theory, two source theory, and finally Farrer theory. Okay, so please listen to this video. Just go back to it one or two more times. Okay, so that you can make your own notes, okay, which will be easier for you in your own style. How you can follow this, you make that own notes and think about it, okay, think about it. So this we have not done in a very extensive manner. You are just getting introduced to it in this course, okay, but just think about it. Think about this issue of synoptic problem. How about the similarities among these three gospels, and how about the differences? In what ways we can explain it? Okay, scholars have come up with these kinds of very valuable theories, okay, and think through the theories, okay, how each scholar is talking about this synoptic problem, how they are trying to bring out a solution. All right, so I'll give a word of conclusion, a present conclusion. Why I say present conclusion is because this issue is not completely solved, okay, still there are debates going on, so which may change, but the present conclusion which we can hold on to is two source theory is the widely held solution to the synoptic problem, and which is followed by Farrer's theory. Okay, two source theory is the widely held solution, okay, by many scholars, and that followed by Farrer's theory. Okay, today not many scholars hold on to the Augustinian or Griesbach theory. All right, so according to this, what are the conclusions we can make? We can make that Markan priority is generally accepted. That is, Mark wrote his gospel first, and then Matthew and Luke used Mark certainly. This is another conclusion that we can make. Okay, firstly, Mark and priority. Secondly, Matthew and Luke used Mark. And thirdly, whether or not Matthew and Luke had common and unique sources like Q, M, and L is still widely debated. Okay, so this point is debated. So this is the conclusion that we can come up with at the moment. Okay, Mark wrote his gospel first, Matthew and Luke used Mark. And regarding the other sources like Q source, M source, and L source, which we do not have, scholars continue to debate it very hotly. Okay, so that's the present conclusion that we can come up with. All right, I'm stopping this screen right now. Let me share with you diagrams of these theories so that that you can also just click it and keep and look into it. Okay, let me share a Word file with you where you can find some diagrams explaining these theories. You can quickly take some screenshots of it, and later you can cross-check with the notes that I presented now. Okay, first comes Augustinian theory. See here, Matthew, you have at the top Mark and Luke. So Mark used Matthew, and then Luke used both Matthew and Mark. Okay, you may just take a screenshot of this and look into it. Then we have the Griesbach theory, where you have Matthew on the top, Luke in the middle, and Mark at the bottom. So Luke used Matthew, and then comes Mark, who both used Luke and who used both Matthew and Luke. Okay, so just cross-check with the notes that I shared with you. You will understand better. Here we come to two source theory. Is the widely held theory, as I told. So here on the top you have Mark and Q, and on the bottom you have Matthew and Luke. Okay, see how Matthew has used Mark and also he used Q. Same with Luke. Luke used Mark and also used Q. Fine. Finally, you have the Farrer theory, where you have Mark on top, Matthew in the middle, Luke at the bottom. So Matthew used Mark, and then comes Luke, who used Matthew and Mark. Okay, fine. So just hearing this for the very first time, it may be a bit confusing for you. Nothing to worry. Just go through it a couple of times and ponder about it. you'll be able to understand. Okay, thank you. Okay, friends, at the end, let me also say, I'll be sharing another file with you probably now, okay, along with this video. So that will be for your assignment today. So what you have to do is you have to just read through it and give a brief summary of it. That will be a kind of reading report for you, okay. So you have two works today. One is for your attendance, that is the regular work that you do, summary of the topics covered in the video. And secondly, for your assignment, that's a reading report which I will share with you. Okay, thank you.